The forest was alive with strange sounds. Tall glowing trees stood like giants, their branches dripping with silver leaves that shone softly in the night. Daniel, a human explorer, walked carefully through the alien woods. His boots sank into soft moss that sparkled faintly under each step. The air was thick with the scent of unknown flowers and buzzing insects that darted away when he moved. He carried a scanner in one hand and a light pack on his shoulders. It had been 3 days since he left his camp to map this side of the valley. He expected to find new plants, maybe strange animals, but what he found that night was something entirely different. Daniel heard a sound. It was not the usual rustle of leaves or the growl of a hidden creature. It was small, almost like a cry. He froze and looked around. His eyes scanned the bushes until he saw movement near the base of a giant tree. Slowly he walked closer, careful not to frighten whatever it was. He crouched down and lifted a branch aside. There, hiding in the shadows, was a tiny figure. At first, Daniel thought it was some kind of animal, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized it was a child. Not a human child, but a small alien girl. She was no taller than his knee, with skin that glowed faintly blue in the moonlight. Her large, shining eyes stared at him with pure terror. Her hands trembled as she clutched a leaf bigger than her own body, trying to use it as a shield. She was whispering words in a language he could not understand, but the meaning was clear. She was begging him not to hurt her. Daniel blinked in surprise. He had read reports about miniature alien tribes living deep in these forests, but he had never seen one up close. Now one of them was right in front of him, and she looked more fragile than a bird. He could see a small wound on her leg, wrapped in nothing but a strip of plant fiber. Blood darker than human blood had dried around it. She was injured and afraid. The girl's name, though Daniel did not know it yet, was Lyra. She had heard stories all her life about the giants from the sky, humans. Her people said the giants were dangerous, devourers of small creatures. To her, Daniel's shadow towering above her was the shadow of death. Her heart raced and her mind screamed that she should run, but her leg ached too much. She pressed herself tighter against the tree, waiting for the end. Daniel slowly raised his hand, palm open, showing he had no weapon. He spoke softly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Of course, Lyra did not understand his words. To her ears, the deep sound of his voice was like the growl of a predator. She let out a tiny squeak and covered her face with the leaf. Daniel sighed. He realized she was terrified of him. He thought for a moment, then reached into his pack. He pulled out a water flask and set it gently on the ground between them. Then he took a step back, lowering himself to sit on the moss. He wanted to show her that he was not a threat. He tapped the flask lightly and pushed it toward her with one finger. Lyra peeked from behind her leaf. She saw the shining metal object and flinched. She had no idea what it was, but the giant was not moving closer. Slowly her eyes moved to the flask. Her throat was dry. She had been lost in the forest for a long time before he found her, and thirst burned inside her. Still, fear kept her frozen. What if it was a trick? What if the giant was offering poison? Daniel waited patiently. He picked up his own small water tube, drank from it, and showed her the action. Then he smiled and set it aside. His smile was warm, though his teeth seemed sharp to Lyra. For a long while she stayed hidden. Finally, shaking with both fear and need, she crept forward on her hands and knees. Her leg hurt, but her thirst was stronger. She touched the flask, pressed the button, and a drop of water spilled onto her fingers. She sniffed it. Then carefully she licked it, her eyes widened. It was water, pure and clean. She drank quickly, her tiny hands struggling to hold the flask. Daniel leaned forward just enough to steady it for her. She froze at his touch, but when she realized he was only helping, she did not resist. The cool water slid down her throat, and for the first time since she was separated from her people, she felt a little relief. When she finished, she stepped back, clutching the flask close to her chest like a treasure. She still feared him, but confusion began to mix with that fear. Why had he not eaten her? Why had he given her water instead of taking her away? Daniel looked at her injured leg. He could not ignore it. He slowly pulled out a small med kit from his pack. He opened it carefully, showing her each piece. A bandage, a small spray, a strip of cloth. He placed them on the ground where she could see. Lyra's eyes followed his every move. She thought he might be preparing some strange human weapon. But when Daniel tore a piece of bandage and pointed gently to her leg, she understood a little. He wanted to heal her. Her instinct screamed at her to refuse. Her people said never to let the giants touch them. But her leg throbbed with pain. She had tried to treat it with leaves, but it was not enough. Slowly, nervously, she let him come closer. Her tiny body shook as Daniel's enormous hand approached. She flinched when his fingers brushed her leg, but then something unexpected happened. The pain eased. The cooling spray numbed the wound, and the clean bandage wrapped tightly around it. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. He had not harmed her. He had helped her. She looked up at him, and for the first time, their eyes met without complete terror. She still did not trust him fully, but a tiny spark of doubt began to form in her beliefs. Maybe the giants were not monsters. Maybe this one was different. Daniel smiled gently as he finished. "There," he whispered, though she did not know the words. "Better?" Lyra did not answer. She only hugged the flask of water tighter and stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. The forest around them whispered with the sound of night creatures, but for a moment both human and alien sat in silence. Two beings from different worlds, separated by fear and stories, had taken the first step toward something unexpected. The night grew colder, and Daniel slowly leaned back, giving her space. Lyra, still wary, crawled closer to the warmth of his light stick planted in the ground. She did not speak, but she no longer hid behind the leaf. Her heart still pounded, but deep inside, she felt something new, something she had never felt when thinking about humans before. It was not safety yet, not trust, but it was the beginning of curiosity. The night passed slowly in the glowing forest. Daniel stayed awake for a long time, keeping watch while the small alien girl curled near the warm light of his stick. She never closed her eyes completely, only half slept, always peeking at him with suspicion. But when the first pale rays of the alien dawn reached the treetops, Daniel noticed something important. She had not run away. She was still there, sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching him with wide eyes full of caution and wonder. Daniel gave her a small smile and rose to his feet. He stretched his arms, then checked his scanner. He needed to head back to his camp before his power supply ran low, but he could not simply leave her here injured and alone. He turned toward her and spoke softly, pointing to himself. "Daniel." He tapped his chest again. "Daniel," the girl blinked. She tilted her head like a curious bird. She did not understand his words, but she understood the gesture. After a long pause, she tapped her own chest with tiny fingers and whispered, "Lyra." Daniel's heart lifted. A name, that was the first bridge between them. He nodded gently. "Lyra." The sound of her name felt strange in his mouth, but he smiled. She looked startled when he repeated it, but then, just slightly, her lips curved. He packed his things slowly, careful to make every movement calm and harmless. Then he gestured toward the path. "Camp," he said, pointing ahead. "Safe." He mimed walking, then looked at her questioningly. Lyra hugged the flask he had given her, her tiny body still tense. For a moment Daniel thought she would refuse, but then she limped forward on her bandaged leg and stood beside him. She was still afraid, but something in her had changed. She was willing to follow. The journey back was slow. Daniel adjusted his stride so she could keep pace. Often she stopped, startled by a sound hiding behind a tree root or a bush. Each time, Daniel waited patiently. He never rushed her. Once, a bright red insect with wings the size of his hand buzzed too close, and Lyra cried out. Instinctively, Daniel waved the insect away. Lyra's eyes widened as she realized he had protected her again. By the time they reached his camp, the sun was high. Daniel's camp was simple: a portable shelter, a cooking unit, a small power station. To Lyra, it looked like the den of a giant. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing. Daniel noticed and crouched low, beckoning her inside gently. He placed his weapons far away, where she could see them but also see that he did not reach for them. He offered her food, compressed nutrient bars and dried fruit. She stared at the strange items suspiciously. The legends said humans tricked small ones with food before devouring them. She shook her head firmly and backed away. Daniel didn't push her. Instead, he sat cross-legged and began to eat a bar himself. He chewed slowly, then held out another piece again. Lyra's stomach growled. She tried to hide the sound, but Daniel heard it. He said nothing, only pushed the food closer and then turned his head aside, pretending not to notice. Finally, her hunger overcame her fear. She took a tiny bite. Her face scrunched at the unfamiliar taste, but it was not poison. It was food, strange food, but food that filled her empty belly. She nibbled carefully, always watching him. Daniel smiled faintly, glad to see her eat. Over the next hours, Daniel tried to speak with her using gestures. He drew shapes in the dirt, a tree, a star, a simple house. She stared, then scratched her own symbols next to his. Slowly, they began to trade meaning. She learned the sound tree when he pointed at one, and he tried to copy her alien word for it. Sometimes they laughed when they misunderstood each other, though her laugh was soft and nervous. At night, the forest grew dangerous again. Strange eyes glowed in the darkness circling the camp. Daniel stood ready with his light weapon, but he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. Suddenly, a beast resembling a mix of a wolf and reptile crept close. Its body was low, its teeth shining. Lyra froze in terror, certain this was the end. She knew such predators hunted her people. But before the beast could strike, Daniel stepped forward. He raised his light weapon and fired into the air. A bright beam shot across the trees, and the beast yelped, retreating into the shadows. Daniel kept watch until the last pair of glowing eyes vanished. Lyra was stunned. She had thought, even until now, that perhaps he was waiting for the right moment to harm her. But what she had seen was different. He had risked himself to save her life. When the danger passed, Daniel lowered his weapon and sat again by the fire. He noticed Lyra staring at him, her small body trembling not with fear but with shock. Slowly, she picked up a glowing fruit from her pouch, a rare fruit from the forest, one her people treasured. She stepped forward, holding it out with both hands. Daniel tilted his head. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, but also the sincerity. Carefully, he accepted the fruit and took a small bite. It was sweet, glowing faintly in the firelight. He smiled at her and nodded. "Thank you, Lyra." For the first time, she gave him a true smile. It was small, fragile, but real. She had shared something precious with him. That night, as she rested near the warm glow of the campfire, Lyra's thoughts were heavy. Her people had told her humans were devourers, dangerous giants who could never be trusted. But this human, Daniel, had given her water, healed her wound, protected her, and even accepted her gift. She looked at him as he sat watching the fire, and confusion swirled inside her heart. She did not understand him. Not fully, but she understood this. He was not the monster from the stories. He was something else. Something she did not yet have a word for, and Daniel, though he could not read her thoughts, felt the shift too. He looked at the tiny alien girl resting by his fire and realized she was no longer just a frightened stranger. She was becoming his companion in this strange world. The bond between human and alien had begun, fragile yet unbreakable. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of birds with crystal-like voices echoing across the glowing forest. He stretched, rubbed his eyes, and looked around. Lyra was awake before him, sitting on a root with her knees tucked to her chest. She watched the sunrise, her small face calm but thoughtful. When she saw him stir, she stood quickly, clutching the flask he had given her. She still guarded it like a treasure. Daniel smiled and checked his equipment. His scanner showed low power. He needed to return to his main base soon, but his mind kept circling back to the little alien girl. He could not abandon her. She was far from safe. He crouched down and tried to speak slowly, using gestures. He pointed at her, then toward the deep woods. "Home?" he asked. He drew a circle in the dirt, trying to show a village. Lyra understood enough. She nodded hesitantly, then pointed in a different direction, far from where Daniel had come. She tapped her injured leg gently, then raised her small hand and traced a path in the air. Her meaning was clear. She wanted him to take her back to her people, but the journey was dangerous. Daniel thought for a moment. He had not planned to travel further into the forest, but he could not say no. He packed up, slung his pack over his shoulders, and gestured for her to lead the way. Lyra's face showed both relief and fear. She had never thought a human would help her return home. The path was long and full of obstacles. The roots of the trees twisted like walls and vines hung like barriers. Several times, Lyra guided him to hidden trails he would never have noticed. She tapped his boot with her tiny hand when she wanted him to stop, warning of quicksand pools or poisonous plants. Daniel realized she knew this forest better than any human explorer ever could. Though small, she was sharp-eyed and brave in her own way. Hours passed. Once, they crossed a stream that shimmered with glowing fish. Daniel carried her across, holding her gently in his palm as she clung to the flask. Her heart pounded, but she did not cry out. Another time, they passed beneath the shadow of a huge flying beast with wings like sails. Daniel kept low, covering Lyra with his arm until it passed. Each moment of danger drew them closer. though neither spoke the other's language. At last, as the sun dipped low and painted the forest in gold, they reached a clearing. Beyond the trees stood tiny houses built from leaves and crystal stones. Smoke rose from small fires. Dozens of miniature figures moved about, their glowing blue skin like Lyra's. Her eyes filled with tears at the sight. She pointed eagerly, whispering words Daniel did not know, but her joy was clear. She ran forward on her bandaged leg, calling out in her tongue. The other small aliens turned, gasping at the sight of her. Several rushed toward her, surrounding her with cries of relief, but then their eyes fell on Daniel, the clearing filled with fear and shouts. The little aliens scattered, grabbing sharp sticks and tiny spears. To them, Daniel was not a rescuer, but a giant invader. They spread out in defensive lines, trying to protect Lyra. The chief, an elder with silver lines glowing across his skin, stepped forward with anger in his eyes. He raised his hand, pointing at Daniel, shouting in their tongue. Daniel lifted his hands in peace. He wanted to explain, but he had no words they would understand. He looked at Lyra, who stood in front of him, trying to speak quickly to her people. She gestured at her healed leg, showing the bandage. She mimed drinking from the flask. She pointed at Daniel's chest, then at the forest. Her words were rushed but full of emotion. The villagers did not calm at once. Some still shouted warnings. But the elder stared at the bandage, then at Daniel's face. His eyes narrowed. Slowly he lowered his hand. The others followed his lead, though their weapons did not drop completely. Lyra stepped closer to the elder, her tiny hand gripping his. She spoke again, her voice trembling but strong. She pointed once more to Daniel, then to the sky above, tracing a circle with her hand. She was telling them what she had seen, how the human giant had protected her, not harmed her. The elder bent down, listening. When she finished, he turned back to Daniel. There was still mistrust in his gaze, but also something new, curiosity. He raised both hands in a gesture Daniel guessed was respect. Then he stepped aside, allowing Lyra to stand between them without fear. The village slowly came closer. Some of the children peeked from behind huts, their eyes wide. They saw Lyra smiling, safe and alive. Their fear lessened. One brave child even touched Daniel's boot and then ran away, laughing nervously. Daniel crouched low, bringing himself closer to their level. He did not move fast or sudden. He took the glowing fruit Lyra had given him earlier and held it up, showing he had accepted her gift and carried it safely. Murmurs spread among the little aliens. They understood the symbol. That night, Daniel was not treated as a guest, but he was not attacked either. The villagers allowed him to stay at the edge of their homes. Lyra sat with him, eating the forest fruit while he ate from his pack. Slowly, the tension of fear began to fade. When the stars filled the sky, Daniel looked at Lyra. She was sitting with other children now, showing them her bandaged leg and telling the story with wild gestures. They laughed in disbelief, but their eyes were full of wonder. She looked back at him once, and for the first time she did not look afraid. She smiled, a true smile that reached her eyes. Daniel felt warmth in his chest. He realized the unexpected turn had already happened. He had started this journey thinking of alien forests, dangerous beasts, and survival. Instead, he had found trust where there was once only fear. He had not just saved one small girl. He had planted the first seed of friendship between humans and her people. As the night breeze carried the sound of tiny voices, Daniel whispered to himself, "Maybe we're not so different after all." Lyra, though she could not hear his words, felt the same truth in her heart. The human giant was no devourer. He was her protector, her friend. And under the endless stars, the future between their worlds no longer seemed impossible.